All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Riley Fay. I'm the Digital Content and Media Lead here at GBBC. And we would like to welcome you to Emerging Topics in Blockchain Law, which is presented by the GBBC initiative, the International Journal of Blockchain Law, also known as IJBL. IJBL is an open access online journal written and edited by lawyers and designed to help business and non-legal communities better understand the world of blockchain and digital assets. So if you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box below, and we will do our best to get to them if we have time at the end. So thank you so much. I will now turn it over to IJBL's Editor-in-Chief, Matthias Arzt, to introduce the session.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce the panelists. Let's start with Nina Moffatt. She's a partner in the London office of Paul Hastings. She has been focusing her practice on providing legal and commercial advice on regulatory requirements across Europe and on helping regulated firms comply with evolving regulatory obligations. She has particular expertise in cross-border offerings involving crypto asset products and product design. She also assists clients with their relations with UK regulators, including crypto asset applications for registration and supervisory issues. Then we have Diego Ballon Ossio. He's a partner at Clifford Chance, London, spearheading fintech offerings. His broad regulatory practice spans across the entire spectrum of non-contentious financial services regulation, covering trading, custody, and settlement of traditional investments and digital assets, as well as strategic advice to regulatory authorities on the design and development of new regulatory frameworks. And last but not least, we have Guilherme C. Hellwig. He's a legal professional who currently serves as a legal counsel at the Central Bank of Brazil. He's currently working in the monetary and international unit at the Central Bank of Brazil in Brasilia, covering matters related to CBDC and tokenization of financial assets. He has an extensive academic background with a particular focus on regulatory internationalization in the Brazilian financial system. His expertise lies in areas such as financial regulation, economic law, administrative law, and international law. In addition to his role at the central bank, Guilherme is also a guest lecturer in the postgraduate law courses. With that, I would like to hand over to Eric. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. So I'm really excited about this panel discussion today with such an esteemed group. And for anybody who is expecting like a CBDC or a stablecoin 101, you are going to be disappointed because we've got some interesting ground to cover today, and we're going to just get right into it. So we have expertise here and practical expertise with regards to the Brazilian market with Guilherme, and also like in the Middle East with Diego, some of the countries that he's been working with firsthand on what they're rolling out. So with that, I'm just going to ask a general question to both Diego first, then Guilherme. How are countries like Brazil and like the UAE considering stablecoins and CBDCs as part of their policy objectives?
Sure. I think that the important point to set out first is to think about how the CBDC movement sort of got kicked off, and I think the real catalyst for that has been the proposal by the Libra consortium, which included Facebook, for the creation of a global stablecoin. That's, I think, what I would point to as the genesis of central banks considering their position around digital payment tokens. It may have started sooner, but I think that certainly gave it the boost that we're now perceiving in when jurisdictions are thinking about their products. And so when you think about CBDCs from a central bank perspective, I think it's a way for a central bank to deploy the technology whilst at the same time retain the monetary policy grip that they have on the wider currency. Whereas stable coins are more an add-on. They're akin to commercial bank money, sometimes privately issued tokens that will facilitate the payments, but are sort of not an M0 concept, that they sit underneath that and would then facilitate the wider interactions in the retail economy.
Well, speaking about Brazil, on stablecoins, from a regulatory perspective, we are still beginning to address this matter. Recently, in 2022, the Brazilian Congress enacted a law about digital asset service providers. And after that, a presidential decree gave the Central Bank of Brazil a mandate to regulate the subject. So we recently had a public consultation on that, and currently we're having internal studies and debates on that matter. So we still don't have a final regulation on stablecoins, which is expected in the end of this year. But about CBDC, we have an initiative. It's called the DREX initiative. It's the Brazilian CBDC, and it's part of a broader strategic innovation agenda of Central Bank of Brazil that also includes a fast payment system, PIX, which was very successfully implemented in 2020, and also open finance. And then with the development of CBDC, we expect basically to explore the benefits of tokenization, but also to preserve the central role and relevance of central bank money and its settlement function.
Excellent. And one of the genesis for doing this podcast was the structures that Brazil and UAE and others are exploring, and how they all interconnect between the different forms of tokenized fiat or payment. And so in having this discussion today, there's going to be a few different concepts: tokenized deposits and e-money, stable coins. And I'd like to sort of unpack some of that here before we get into it, because in addition to this, DREX is sort of what is known as a two-tier system with regards to CBDCs, and these concepts become very relevant. So Diego, if you could kick off, and then we'll follow up with Nina on this question.
Sure. I mean, I think there are lots of proposals and lots of different concepts, so I'm unavoidably have to sort of summarize and synthesize. And I may take views that are not necessarily those of every project. But I think we could take the position that, generally speaking, a CBDC is an M0 money proposal, which is backed by the central bank and either used for retail purposes or wholesale purposes or both. Whereas when we think of electronic money and stable coins, certainly in the EU and in the UK, I would regard those as variants of each other. And the reason for that is that, we've got a very long-standing electronic money framework in the EU, even before Brexit, and now it's inherited in the UK. And that framework for electronic money effectively defines electronic money as prepaid spending power. If you want to look at it that way, it's basically a claim on the issuer. The issuer is a non-bank issuer, although banks can issue it too, technically. And the point is that the funds received when there is a non-bank issuer will be ring-fenced and held in a pool. A stable coin is simply a token that tries to retain its value, and it does so through some sort of mechanism that may be some sort of algorithmic mechanism. But in most cases, and the most widely used stablecoins are stablecoins where the pool of money that's been received is said to equate to a claim on the issuer and is held in a pool. And you can see how we very quickly then start going into some sort of conflated concept where stable coins were meant maybe initially from an international perspective to be something other than electronic money, but actually because of the definition that we've got, this very broad definition of electronic money, certainly in the EU and in the UK, they start to conflate.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry.
No, you go.
Guilherme?
Well, okay, then I think it's important about Drex to make it clear that it's still being developed. It's not complete yet. So although it's already possible to have an idea of its general characteristics and key features because they are periodically updated by official guidelines, there is still some fundamental technical and operational decisions that yet had to be made by Central Bank of Brazil until Drex final implementation. So we have a pilot going on, and the basic idea and about Drex and this is really important on its model of CBDCs that Central Bank of Brazil intends to develop not only specifically a CBDC, but also a programmable platform where a tokenized version of a wholesale CBDC, which is Drex, interacts with a tokenized versions of commercial bank deposits and tokenized e-money in order to reap the benefits of tokenization. The basic idea is to reproduce in this programmable platform the current structure, the two-tiered structure of the monetary system. So we still don't have the final version of it, but basically it reproduces the bank deposits and e-money in this programmable platform. So the legal characterization of bank deposits and e-money that we have in Brazil will probably apply that to these tokenized versions of deposits and e-money in this programmable platform. That's where we stand now.
Excellent, excellent. So to take a bit of a step back now and sort of think about the regulatory frameworks and the policy objectives more broadly, Nina, I'm just wondering if you could sort of kick off, some of the regulatory concerns regarding these different instruments that we're talking about today, including things like, stability, competition with fiat, implications for monetary sovereignty.
Yeah, I think let's focus on. I think e-money, as Diego says, has been around a long time in the UK and the EU as a concept, and sort of started in that traditional sense of a prepaid card and has been stretched. But I think where the focus has been, certainly from the legislative perspective in the UK and the EU, and particularly in the UK, is on stable coins. And I think to think about the regulatory concerns, you take a step back and say, well, what do they do? What are the use cases for them? And the UK government has recognised that stable coins pave the way for faster and cheaper payments, and that the use of stable coins has been on the rise for some time. The UK government reported that in June 2020, the value of transactions in stable coins exceeded Bitcoin for the first time, and we're seeing continued growth of stablecoin use. So certainly from the UK perspective, I think it's also true from the European bodies and certain other regulators and governments, is that if there can be appropriate standards of regulation imposed, then stablecoins do have the potential to play a really vital role in retail and cross-border payments, including settlement, and to deliver things of speed and efficiency and resilience. I think you already see that in the market with the likes of private crypto asset companies, digital companies like Ripple using XRP as a bridge currency to move money. And the big differentiator they have in the market is that they're doing it in 3 seconds rather than 3 days to move international payments. So I think you're seeing a lot more. I also think that you see in the crypto ecosystem, stablecoins being effectively the cornerstone of liquidity. If you deal with crypto asset firms, that is, they're always looking at the stable coins. So against that backdrop of what they are and what they can be, there are risks, right? The more widely they're used as a means of payment, the more financial stability and real economy risks they pose. The UK government has certainly recognised that there is an intrinsic risk to consumers. There's a risk of misunderstanding. What are they? And I think Diego made that PO. What are they? Are they a regulated money product? Are they unregulated? What uniform do they wear? And therefore, what protections do consumers and market participants who use them have? But I think the big thing that sticks out to me with stablecoin risk as compared to CBDCs is that the preeminent ones in the market are private issued. So you are taking the risk of the issuer, because there is some sort of claim against that issuer. You're taking the risk of third parties in the ecosystem that move those stable coins around. So that is a big key risk. So as a result of all of this, and potentially what I think you're seeing is certain market dominance of certain stablecoin issuers as well. I think that's what's prompting certainly the UK government to decide to address those risks, with the idea of moving this into kind of a more regularized environment so that stablecoins can continue to develop and flourish, maintain a stable value as well. Is that you're seeing UK regulation, for example, coming in for fiat-backed stable coins. There will be a regulatory framework. There will be regulation for prudential and conduct purposes. So I think that's sort of a kind of chronology of the why and why we're seeing regulation in certainly in the UK and EU from a stablecoin perspective.
Excellent. And so as we start to approach some of these challenges, and I guess probably more so for stablecoin, but how do we, what are the regulatory focuses for CBDCs compared to these concerns for stablecoins? Diego, do you want to lead off on that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's the points that Nina was making are the primary risk focuses, and so they're trying to be addressed, right? So the main issue is you've got a non-bank actor potentially issuing spending power, and that is meant to be secured against a claim against that issuer. And so the key question for the regulator here is, how do we safeguard the consumer's rights to those funds? As we know, banks are subject to capital requirements, and they're subject to very stringent rules around what they are allowed to do with capital. A private issuer that's a non-bank actor wouldn't be subject to that. So what's the equivalent? And I think the UK and also the EU are playing around with certain protections, not allowing the pooled assets to be used for other purposes other than potentially investing, that the assets must be held in a highly liquid form, they can be transformed easily, and then giving some sort of right of redemption to every user that's holding the coin, so that you have a direct claim against the issuer, and you're not somehow sort of in a two-tier structure where you couldn't, even though you're holding the coin, you couldn't go back to the issuer and convert them back into your traditional money. Those are the legal measures that are being thought about and implemented in the EU. We see that already in the context of stablecoins that also qualify as electronic money. In the UK, that's at the moment still a proposal, but I think that's sort of the trends that we're looking at, and creating a way in which consumers can be safe. I think that the second point then is making sure that the operational risks that exist as a result of the use of this new technology are fully understood and adequately mitigated. And that's a question, we're seeing that at various levels at BCBS, we're seeing it at levels of IOSCO and others of international standard setters, providing guidance and saying, there is operational risk. It's the new type of operational risk that the financial markets have not fully understood or have not yet having to dealt with in the last few years. And so now we need to focus our minds onto that, and how do we mitigate that? And this is where some of the questions which, may seem absurd from a regulatory, from a user perspective, come. For example, like you shouldn't be using public blockchains. You should only limit yourself to private chains, etc. Where does that balance it? I think we're all working towards finding that out, and I think regulators, quite rightly, are starting to err on the side of caution, and putting in place restrictions so that we know we've got a quantified level of risk that we can mitigate.
Right, and I guess touching on that point of caution is, particularly when we're addressing concepts of like systemic risk, which, it seems to be, ever since 2008, systemic risk has sort of, taken on a greater significance. What are your thoughts about how this focus on systemic risk for now, like a new product, like stable coins or CBDCs, how it's potentially even potentially creating more systemic risk because everything sort of has to follow a sort of a more unitary structure that may itself present its own systemic risks, and it sort of limits the ability to innovate and oftentimes there's failures in economic systems. If they're little failures, they're better for adjustment than big failures, which, if you get rid of all the little failures, then you just have big failures, right? And that can be even more systemically risky. Like maybe I start with Guilherme and we just go around, on that point. What are your thoughts about like maybe an excessive focus on systemic risk and how the regulators are actually balancing sort of the pressures of innovation or embracing the new technology versus sort of a unitary, more traditionally focused version of systemic risk?
Well, I think there are two sides of this question. Well, firstly, concerns related with the risks associated with the use of private stablecoins was one of the reasons that were stated by the Central Bank of Brazil to develop a CBDC as an alternative in the crypto economy that could be used relying in central bank money. On the other side, as I told you, we still don't have the final regulation on stable coins, but at least in a preliminary assessment, there's no intention to ban the use of stable coins. The idea is to make it sure that it complies with Brazilian legislation and with concerns about business of conduct and anti-money laundering and well, overall financial stability. But I think that there is this idea that both this tokenized version of central bank money and also private stablecoins should coexist and still we still are taking, the technical and operational decisions about that. But one of the official guidelines about the DREX initiative is to secure interoperability, not only with the traditional financial system, but also with crypto assets and specifically with stable coins. So that's a guiding principle of our regulatory approach.
Excellent. Nina?
I suppose playing up with your sort of innovation point, I think it's a very interesting point whenever you get regulation. Like, does that promote innovation, competition, or does it not? And I think sadly, having practiced in the fintech space for a while, it doesn't often have the in consequence of creating more competition legislation in reality. I think if you look at stable coins, I think the increased regulation coming out of Europe in pipeline for the UK, I think is going to impact private issuers of stablecoins. I think it already has started to. The cost of compliance for what I would say the traditional crypto players who have issued stablecoins, I'm not sure we're going to see in that same level in the new world. I do think that what you are seeing, we'll probably see, is UK and EU banks, particularly EU banks, diversifying their own sort of portfolios into stablecoin issuance. You see that already in Europe, and lots of European banks continue to explore that area. So not to be the pessimist about innovation, but I think certainly there will be a change in the market participants in this sector. I think there will probably end up being a shift more to the TradFi getting into the innovative products rather than the sort of initial innovators possibly having the same position they have at the moment.
Excellent. So shifting back to like the interplay of CBDCs and versus stable coins, how could CBDCs serve as like, following up on Nina's point too, how could CBDCs serve as like sovereign digital money competition to stable coins, and what would be the regulatory implications of this competition? Maybe you start with Guilherme and then Diego.
Well, basic idea is that to offer, building on the trust of central bank money, to offer and tokenized alternative that in a kind of way that competes with this private options presented by stable coins. So that's the reason why the main objective of developing a CBDC in Brazil, it's not restricted to the CBDC, but also to developing this whole programmable platform that goes beyond the settlement layer. It has this broader objective to enable Brazilian citizens and companies to enjoy the benefits of functionalities like smart contracts and composability in order to offer this alternative to the crypto economy and specifically to private stablecoins. So yeah, I think that was one of the reasons that led to this more ambitious project of developing a programmable platform.
Excellent. Diego?
Yeah, I mean, I thought your question is interesting because it can be answered from two perspectives. I would say, if you think about the user perspective, I think how could CBDC serve as a sovereign competitor to stablecoins? It's all about the use case. All about the use case and all about what the CBDC allows the user to do, right? And in that context, some really mundane things can drive adoption. To give you an example, in the UK, we've had tap technology, contactless payment technology for a long time, but it only got adopted when something as trivial as the TfL, the Transport for London, opened it up for basically day-to-day rail travel. When that happened, people started using the contactless payment functionality of their wallets much more. That opened up the mass uses, and then it sort of started to sip into other payment methods. And now I think in the UK we've got really, really high adoption of contactless payments. From the user's perspective, I think they don't care about the legal position of one money versus the other. They just care about convenience, about the particular way in which you can use it. So, the only way in which CBDCs can compete is if they can convince the user that it's that there's something in it for them, that it's a bit seamless use, particular ability to use in certain products or whatever it is. The use case will drive that. I think if you think about from a legal perspective, then it becomes more technical. It's less sort of user focused, and it's more around, can the singleness of money be preserved through the use of CBDCs and other things. And when I talk about singleness of money, I mean, this very unconscious thing that we do today when we, take out our bank card and pay someone. For us, that is exactly the same as using a $10 note or a coin or doing some other, transfer via the phone. For us, that's the same as users, but that's only possible because the value of each of these payment methods is actually the same. So we've achieved singleness of money. Money is the same regardless of what form it's taking. If that can be achieved with stable coins and with CBDCs, then I think that's a real contender, because then the CBDC framework, because it's centralized, it can be operated more generically, and it can be rolled out for specific issues or problems that the particular economy may have, that may then sort of be the adopter.
So I guess that is a bridge to the next question, which is about coexistence and interoperability. Maybe we'll start with Nina on this one. Why is, maybe explore a little bit why the importance of interoperability between CBDCs and stablecoins?
I suppose, I could be, I was actually thinking about this myself, and I do think it's important, but just to probably be contrary for the sake of this, I think there's also an argument to say that coexistence between them can work, and do they really need to be interoperable in the truest sense? They can provide separate services, potentially stablecoins probably having a more targeted use case than the CBDCs if they get the uptake that Diego was talking about. I certainly think that there may be a world where both coexist but don't necessarily need to connect together fully, given and again, a lot of it comes down to specifics of use cases, but I certainly think that there is stablecoins is in a way have the benefit of the first mover advantage, you know, and they've already got a lot of that kind of uptake that Diego was talking about is so critical. You know, lots, I think in 2021 per quarter, there was 1 trillion in stablecoin transactions and things like that. I mean, that's not going to go away overnight, but I you know, I think, you know, just to probably play devil's advocate, you know, maybe the position is they don't need to sort of, then that doesn't need to be an interoperability between them. They just coexist in their own lanes, doing their own things. Is one way you could look at it in the future.
And Guilherme, how do you think Brazil is going to approach this question of coexistence or interoperability?
There is, as a guiding principle of the development of drugs, this objective of securing that kind of interoperability. But also, I'd like to stress the fact that this decision to have in Drax platform not only tokenized versions of bank deposits, but also the tokenized version of e-money allows for the possibility of developing a product that fits the basic description of a stablecoin, because you can have payment service providers offering this tokenized version of e-money, which will be denominated in the Brazilian currency and will be fully backed. So in that sense, it fits the legal characterization of e-money in Brazil. So it's a kind of allowing this kind of regulated stablecoin denominated in the Brazilian currency to also be offered, and not by banks, but by fintechs and with other possibilities of business models and opening space for innovation.
Eric, if I may, I wanted to react to Nina's point, because I thought it was a fantastic point that she's making, which is that it sort of depends on what you mean by a stable coin, right? So, you know, if we, and this goes back to also my point around singleness of money. So if you assume that stable coins are meant to be the same as other payment methods in a particular jurisdiction, then you absolutely need them to coexist, and you need them to be interoperable in some way, shape, or form. Whereas if you accept that stable coins are just another form of you know, holding spending power, and they may not be the same. And today they are not the same. So today, you know, you can have versions of stable coins that are completely different, and people are fine with it, as long as people understand that they're not the same thing, and that they're taking on a slightly different type of risk, whatever that risk may be, if it's credit risk or something else. Then I see no issue with them not coexisting, you know, and or not being interoperable. The question then is, you know, what is the regulatory framework trying to achieve? And I think the slight problem maybe in the UK is that the regulators have assumed that fiat-backed stablecoins should be the same in all cases, which is sort of an assumption, right? And in order to facilitate that singleness of money thing, what they're then imposing is a lot of requirements of fiat-backed stablecoins to actually be redeemable for money in the way that other forms of money are redeemable, right? And that creates, I think, barriers to innovation. It creates, you know, problems for providers to comply. It also, you know, potentially messes up, you know, some of the business models. If you think about it, one of the extreme scenario in the UK would be a systemically important fiat-backed stablecoin that would have to be regulated by the Bank of England, which could not operate on a public blockchain. Now, the largest 2 stablecoins that we've got in the world, trillions of dollars of transactions, operate on public blockchains. So how would that work, right? So there's an inherent flaw in that thinking, but I think it's driven from that assumption that, you know, regulators want them to be fully interchangeable.
Right. Yeah, sorry, Nina, please.
No, I'm probably going to say I think that's right. I mean, it's what you're going to want it to be, you know, and if that, as Diego says, if that's sort of where a government takes a view, then yes, they can't coexist, right? Because one becomes replacing the other, and the CBDC wins, right? Because of the power to kind of push acceptance through a central bank, through the uptake, and as opposed to, let's say, more of a private issuer model. I think for me, I sort of see a way through insofar as stablecoins having a targeted use case for kind of finite things, not for the to some extent cutting against what, for example, the UK government says about stablecoins being, the potential to sort of facilitate, retail cross-border payments and be used as a sort of cheaper way of doing payments. Maybe we'll see a phoenixing of stablecoins being used for very targeted use cases within models, within bank models, and or within particular ecosystems where, what you're trying to do is much smaller. It's like a mass market, mass payment product. But I think a lot of it does come from the policy decisions of the banks, of the governments, of what this could be. And trying to work out what box you put them in, because if from a policy perspective you're trying to achieve the same with a stable coin and a CBDC, then they cannot coexist. But I think conceptually they can, but they have to all have in a way very clear use cases that work, and the differences have to be accepted.
Right, and is one of the, I guess, victims of this, or one of the things that gets petitioned as a result of this, if the different central banks are applying their own regulatory frameworks to stable coins, does that now start to fray at the international use case of private stable coins? Diego?
I think it.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
I think it can. I mean, at the moment, and Diego's point, the two largest are sort of private or consortium issued stable coins that are openly, publicly grappling with, MiCA, what's coming down the pipeline in the UK, the mess that is the United States, any other, jurisdiction. And I think different jurisdictions, different regions taking different approaches creates legal uncertainty. May create certainty in the jurisdiction, but creates global uncertainty about how you kind of globalize and sort of push out a product that works in all jurisdictions. And also the cost of compliance goes up. And so you have a cost benefit analysis to a lot of this. So I do think for the current world of the sort of privately issued stablecoins, the one that we all think about, I think the world will look very, very different the more regulation comes in that specific area, and you see CBDCs coming in other jurisdictions as well.
Right, and so I think, and Diego, do you have anything to add on to that?
No. I mean, I think that was probably what I was going to say.
Excellent. So I think maybe we'll take in that context, we'll look a little bit deeper at the two-tiered model, and what the two-tiered model means for, the paths of stable coins and CBDCs versus maybe a single tier where, it's CBDCs cover both the wholesale and the retail, or has this broader application. So in the context of Drex, what are the what are the policy considerations in terms of like the benefits? Is it like primarily to encourage that use case for stable coins to ensure that the system can operate under both systems? Is that the thrust of the two-tiered model? Are there other things, is there just the bifurcation in the way that they're sort of approaching these various instruments that serve other policy purposes? Guilherme, if you could share with us some thoughts on that.
Well, okay, so the basic intention is to reproduce in this programmable platform this tier, which is the current structure. So Drex will be accessible as a wholesale CBDC only to these regulated intermediaries, and these intermediaries, which will be banks and payment institutions, by its turn, will issue these tokenized versions of bank deposits and e-money, and they will have relationships with the end user. The end users will have wallets provided by those intermediaries. One of the benefits of this approach, well, first of all, from a legal perspective, this reproduction of the current model doesn't need a new legal basis. So we can develop this model, at least in a preliminary assessment, with the current legislation. At the same time, it preserves the intermediation function of banks and other financial intermediaries, which is very important, credit supply and other really important functions to the economy. And as Diego has stressed, this approach also tries to keep the relevance of the singleness of money. So that was this was an important reason that led to this approach.
Okay, Diego, anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, and I've looked at this for various central banks now, I think the big fear that central banks have, if I may say, is they don't want to deal with retail customers. They just don't. They're not good at it. They don't want to have to bother with the AML. They don't want to have to bother with the you know the nitty gritty sort of bitty process that you have with each individual person. And so really, if you think about it, the only way is to outsource that and to give it to someone else and facilitate that to be done by somebody who's much better at it. And we already have a population of firms that are much better at it because they do it already and have been doing this for years, which is the banking system, the payment service providers, etc., which is the second tier. I think that's how you explain it. It's the easiest way of illustrating it. And the added benefit, I think, for this is not just that the central bank no longer has to deal with retail customers directly, is that also the central bank is not particularly a fintech sort of use case provider that's going to come up with clever ways in which the new payment is going to be used. Typically, those are the people that are going to make money out of interchange fees, or they're going to monetize the transaction somehow. And that is normally the payment services provider / banking population. And so I think, and we see this, for example, you know, Israel has now come up with a project where they're creating a riskless intermediary for the provision of CBDC as part of their second tier. The reason they've done that, and I've been lucky enough to work with them in the early stages of that project via the BIS, is that the reason they've done it is in order to facilitate as much competition as possible for that CBDC wallet provider population, so that you can come up with lots of use cases, lots of innovation, and lots of possibilities for the user, driving that adoption piece. And you know, it's about finding that one use case that will drive the mass adoption. And in the more providers you have that are fighting for that little bit of exchange fee, the higher your chances of a really fantastic use case and real innovation.
And the follow.
Sorry, Eric, if you allow me to.
Sure.
No, just to complement what Diego was saying, I think the main idea is to combine the best efforts of both public sector and private sector, because then and its respective roles. So central bank will provide the infrastructure and the regulation and the supervision, but you know, the creativity and innovation part of it will be an attribution to the private sector and to private companies that operate in the financial sector. That's the idea.
I was just going to follow up a little bit on what on Diego's point, which is, you know, when we talk about the innovation and the different possibilities, one of the things that comes up is obviously the programmability. Like that's the killer use case, right? The extent you have programmable money, that's why we're, you know, in some ways there's a tracking component of it, but in terms of utility and how it hits the road for the population, the use cases, it's the programmability is you know, is where the rubber really hits the road. And I guess, you know, for Diego to start, you know, what are you seeing in terms of like the really thoughtful approaches to either facilitating or executing on the the programmability and its potential efficiencies.
I fully agree with you that that is probably the killer use case. I don't know whether the limited examples of programmability that we've seen so far do it justice. So what I've seen so far, are things like, for example, you can pre-tag a supply chain finance transaction. So, if you're a supplier, you're receiving a payment, you can already pre-tag that and give that away before it even hits your books, so that the bank or the credit provider is already protected and has some sort of confidence that the money is going to flow into them. So you've got various levels of doing that, and you can allocate portions of your salary to something. Those are I think the early stages. I think what at the moment is sort of still a bit tricky is how do you enforce those things, those contracts, and are they true contracts or not, and where do we find the binding regulatory and sort of legal relationship that will actually make that stand up in court? That is tricky, and it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because you can program something on a platform, but it will only bind people to the extent that people have signed up to that platform from a contractual perspective and are liable to that platform to the others, etc. So you need to create complex contractual arrangements that achieve that. And so I think we are only getting into the first stages. As this develops, as legal positions become clearer, we'll start seeing this develop much more, and I think then we'll see real innovation.
Right.
And I'm imagining sort of something sitting, no longer having to have a payment app as such. I find that is going to go away. So the wallet will be embedded in other apps, and you'll be able to log into it directly as part of your normal day-to-day thing, and then that is going to become seamless. The payment piece becomes seamless. You'll operate that.
And certainly the complexity of pairing contracts, across those integrated use cases is still going to exist. I think certainly the promise would be that over time, the immutable operation of the different smart contracts which effectuate that, you could simply make a disclosure, and by definition, if you're participating in it, you agree to the operation of the smart contract. I mean, there'll always be edge cases about enforceability, but the necessity of sort of a bilateral contractual arrangement, to the extent that can be mimicked within a smart contract, which is neither smart nor a contract, but still that immutable operation of how it operates might not have the same driving considerations that would require you to kind of have a whole contractual, two-sided, three-sided, what have you, agreement between the parties. I mean, that's also the killer use case in blockchain. It's horrible if we do all of this, we create all this wonderful stuff, and at the end of the day, we're still shuttling stuff back and forth between DocuSign, which is, an improvement, over the last 20 years, but still not the end goal, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is whether you can actually point towards you having agreed somebody directly with that other party, when you can truly identify that bilateral relationship or not, which I think sometimes it's tricky because of the way the information flow goes. Right.
So I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to the questions, and we can certainly circle back to some of these questions, but we do have one, and Nina will answer it. So there's a devil's advocate perspective, so I'll read it. So if clear guidance is provided in jurisdictions, bank and existing financial institutions will issue their own stablecoins, and and if they are allowed to on and off ramp crypto and digital asset, isn't this going to favor incumbents and challenge existing stablecoins? Which I think we've been sort of talking that it might. We may see this in the EU. Current stablecoins will lose their dominance as banks issue their own stablecoins. You talk about USDT being delisted in certain jurisdictions, due to under MiCA. So, Nina, do you want to?
I suppose I think that's probably put better than I was doing earlier. I think that I share the view. I think we're already seeing that with MiCA. I think generally the sort of what traditional crypto participants that have been the issuers of the stable coins and sort of using crypto as bridge currencies and things are in for a challenge. I think there's already publicly, and sort of we're aware of a lot of European banks investing a huge amount of money into developing their own stable coins and doing more in this space. I think that's a real possibility. I think a lot of it comes from the cost of compliance, and the reality of sort of a lot of these crypto businesses growing up as tech businesses and then moving from completely unregulated world to regulated world very, very quickly, where the infrastructure governance, the whole host of the things that the three lines of defense, all the things that financial institutions have lived and breathed for many, many moons, are not quite there and haven't been there and are being developed, but at the speed of and the cost of increasing compliance not quite there. So I actually echo the question. I think that is actually a real possibility, certainly in the UK and the EU.
May I sort of provide an alternative view on that? Because I think the one thing that may actually prevent all of this happening, it is happening, as Nina says. I agree. I think the one spanner in the works may actually be the capital requirements that banks need to hold against crypto assets. We've seen the BCBS sort of develop their framework, which is not particularly conducive to banks actually holding crypto assets themselves. It's different for stable coins, and it is perfectly possible for banks to issue stable coins, but only stable coins that actually meet the electronic money definition, right? So it's a narrow, in the EU it would be a narrow set of stable coin. Not any tokenization will do that trick, and anything else will be heavily penalized from a capital perspective, which sort of suggests that regulators are not particularly comfortable in banks swooping into the sector and being the new crypto providers, right? So there is a clear barrier for banks to be doing this, particularly for on-balance sheet assets.
I think that's right. I think it's sort of, it is in that stable coin world. I think you see already pre-MiCA that somewhere like Lithuania bans banks from doing anything in crypto, so has already had to separate out. I think that's been practiced from a lot of the European policy regulators for some time. I agree. I don't think they're going to wipe out the crypto industry, but I do think that the kind of stablecoin market's up for grabs, if I can say that.
Yeah, I mean, for the narrow e-money stablecoin market, I think that I would agree. I think the wider sort of asset-backed market is not necessarily at the same level. And as you know, I mean, we've spoken before, Nina, on the PRA's publication. Maybe you want to share that with the audience. But there is some hesitation around electronic money and stablecoins being issued.
Yeah, no, and I think just for those benefit who don't follow it, it's not, I mean, it was back in 2023, but I think it's interesting. Diego and I were talking in the sort of prep sessions that, there's a lot of legal ambiguity and all these terms like tokenized deposit, e-money, stable coin. And I think we could probably, as lawyers, spend far too much time enjoying ourselves on the minutiae detail of all of that. But I thought it was interesting that PRA came out in 2023, and certainly vis-a-vis banks in the UK said, look, like, if you're going to do tokenized deposits, they've got to be deposits. We don't really want you sort of doing stable coins and e-money out of the banks. They're concerned about consumer protection and misunderstanding and confusion around FSCS protection. I think in that, since then, banks are going to do it. They want them to do it out of separate, sort of effectively ring-fenced entities with very different branding. So I think that's an interesting take from a regulator, systemic, the prudential regulator rather than the conduct regulator, interestingly enough, but sort of wanting to have that distinction. And I think the risks are there because I think, Diego, to your point, the regulators are still very hesitant about the legal ambiguities and to your point that you made earlier, the risks of consumers misunderstanding and not understanding the different products and the protections that may or may not come with them.
Right. Another question from Sandra. Much of the focus until now is on the G7 regions. What are the panelists' views on developing growth markets where the crypto growth is the fastest? What countries do you keep your eyes on, if any? Who wants to take that one to start?
I think obviously I'm slightly biased because I'm based here in the UK, and my practice focuses on the UK and the EU. But I think the development of a single regulatory framework on the MiCA and the promise for a single regulatory framework in the UK make both these, I mean, the UK, the EU primarily because it's such a big market, a real potential area of development and real growth in this space with legitimacy, which is what the crypto industry has been pushing for such a long time. So from my perspective, I see that MiCA effect already playing out. Lots of firms are moving, those that want to comply and really want to do this are moving headquarters or regional headquarters into the EU and are really trying to look at ways in which they start combining not just the crypto piece, but crypto payments, securities trading, derivatives into a single potential proposition. And that is exciting.
So I'm going to go to Guilherme on that because you might have a different view.
Well, basically, I have Brazilian regulatory view. Go back to my first answer. I mean, we're still internal debates and studies on how to regulate stablecoins. It's still being prepared, and but the use of stablecoins. Last year, there was a significant increase in the use of private stablecoins in Brazil. Tax authorities already monitor that use for tax reasons. This use, as I have already told you, is a concern. One of the concerns that led to the development of tokenized central money alternative to that. So that's how we see from a policy perspective this issue.
But let's and we don't have too much time, but I'm going to kind of do this a little maybe more lightning round. So there's a lot of talk on. I mean, part of the question was there's so much focus on the G7, and the question is what jurisdictions outside of the G7 do you draw, in the case of Brazil, do you draw inspiration from? Do you look at your Latin American counterparts or other, with regional counterparts, or maybe you look at it more globally? Where, what do you turn to when you're kind of trying to contemplate this as thought leaders outside of the G7? So, yeah, and we'll just sort of go around for the lightning round question here, starting with Guilherme.
Okay, so well, speaking for myself here, I don't know about any clear inspiration in the Brazilian model. As a matter of fact, I mean, this idea of developing this unified ledger that now is being talked about in BIS publications, BIS appoints Brazil as one of the pioneers in developing this model. So there is not a clear inspiration in any other country, at least that I know.
So you're the inspiration.
Maybe.
I'll put words into your mouth.
I hope a good one.
There you go. Nina.
I think that's difficult. I mean, I think generally there's some outside of even CBDCs, but generally in terms of innovation and in payments and generally in fintech, I think when you do look at it, Brazil's been doing a lot of stuff, not just in that sector, but generally looking at open banking and all that sort of stuff. And I'll, not to steal Diego's thunder, I know he's very well experienced in the region, but I do think that, there's a lot of interest, at least at that high level government level in the UAE and the Middle East. And so, whether you take inspiration, but I think they're doing a lot of good thinking, they're getting the right people in the room, they're doing some really interesting things in this space. And I think it's, those areas are ones where there's been a lot of investment at that level. Maybe some other countries have been a little bit more cautious or, haven't thought about things the same way. I always think that, I would love to know more about what's going on in China. I think sometimes we all would. But, I think it'd be always interesting to see more because given the nature of the political system over there, and it would always be interesting to see where they are and how that may work if they are how they are looking into it. But I suppose there's many places where you can get food for thought and lots of people thinking about these things.
All right, so Diego, you have the unenviable position of being last on this, and you can't repeat anything else that's
I
been
can't
said.
repeat.
So
I can't
I'm
repeat.
sorry.
I would have said Middle East, but I think Singapore is the other one that I would mention. So Singapore is doing an interesting position. They are certainly developing their fintech market. They're developing their crypto markets, but they're doing it in a way which is not necessarily for the sake of developing it. They're doing it with a very measured and quite focused manner, where they're really trying to attract sophisticated wholesale markets into their position. And I think that, for me, is the wholesale markets that really drive the innovation and the uptake for serious financial services businesses. Retail is great, but it's difficult because you need to make sure that you protecting your consumers, etc., if you want to do it right.
Any thoughts on the African continent? Anyone? What's an interesting experiment going on there? I know Nigeria, there's Kenya, there's a number of jurisdictions doing things on this front, and perhaps they have even more of a plane to work on, just given how money is actually used in the country currently, right? In the absence of a banking, of an established banking system that people commonly use, these kinds of experiments can actually have more traction and impact those regions. Any thoughts? It's okay if there's none. Just figured I'd fish it out before we close up here.
Look, some of my clients' perception on Africa generally is that they are all booming markets. The slight problem is there is for sophisticated businesses, there is still a lot of uncertainty. It's political uncertainty as well as regulatory uncertainty, because the rule can shift very quickly, and I think that makes it very difficult to sort of maintain an ongoing strategy. So for those clients that are invested in the African continent and see it as a booming business, which it is, then they need to be prepared to quickly pivot into different directions. And so I agree with you that there is lots going on, and it's a great place to do business. It's just that, for some businesses that are set in their ways, it may not be conducive for them.
Okay, well, with that, we're a little bit over time. This has been a great panel. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. This was a pleasure to host, and thanks to all the listeners for tuning in. Yeah, and I guess we'll close it out there.
Thanks very much,
everyone.
Eric. Thanks, everyone. Nice
Thank you very
talking.
much.